call the meeting to order. Note there is no quorum, but we don't vote for anything, so we don't need a quorum. Anyway, let's run around and do introductions, beginning with you, David.
David Nesbitt, Board of Ethics.
You would be next.
Julia Tucker. I was thinking that Lisa would join us. Julia Tucker, Assembly Counsel. Thank you.
Barbara Jones, Municipal Clerk.
Amanda Moser, Clerk's Office.
Bernie Hall, Chair. Lisa, join us at the table. Don't sit back all along. David, as always, we want to accommodate you.
I do appreciate that.
You are welcome.
A brief. First of all, does this committee have any questions for us?
No, thank goodness. We enjoy when we don't have questions for you, because when we have questions for you, it usually means we're in an uncomfortable position.
And we feel very comfortable at the moment on our committee too. So we do have some things under review, but no emergencies or everything is running very smoothly, I think.
Do you want to tell me the subject of these two drafts of the advisory opinions?
Yeah, remind me about it.
The Harris conflict and the proposed trip.
Oh, and that's right. So one was a trip from the mayor, and it was on. Are you talking about the Rasmussen Foundation sponsored a trip?
Do I feel like I'm sinking, or is it my...
You are.
And when I was sitting in that seat last week, and I rotated it to that spot.
Just for me. You knew I would. I'm back.
Yeah. And so there was a trip that the mayor and several other people in Anchorage took down to Wichita, Kansas, or something like that to do that. And so they had followed the procedure in the code and announced their trip, and they all jumped on one of the Rasmussen Foundation jets and flew down there. And they had followed the procedure. They announced it before they left, and we were asked to review that. So we reviewed it. We have an opinion coming out very, very soon. And I think it's going to be released here in the next week, if not this afternoon or tomorrow. And basically just, and I don't see any reason why we can't announce the conclusion, or should we wait until we release it to the complaint?
It's pretty much done.
It's done, right.
It's been
So
accepted by
essentially we're saying it's okay, that they had done everything they needed to do, and we reviewed it and fit under the code. I don't know that there was one of the concerns that was in the complaint was the concept that there's some coziness going on when you're flying on a Rasmussen jet down to Kansas, and you have assembly members in the same jet with community members who are involved in developing these low-income housing units.
I think you came to the correct conclusion.
We analyzed it and came out with our conclusion. The other issue is one with the chief financial officer, Mr. Harris. He has lots of conflicts that do exist with his role on the board of Siri, isn't it? But he was just really impressed. I mean, I'm speaking on behalf of myself at this point, but I mean the board found that he was taking every precaution necessary to fit within the code, and obviously we're going to have to rely on his judgment, and he's going to have to distance himself when necessary. But what a fine catch for the city, and we want to, even if there are those types of conflicts, it's only because he's in the mix and he knows what's going on, and he's so experienced in the field. So what an advantage to have for the city under those circumstances. A little bit like our boards. Some of our boards have a lot of people who are involved in the industry in the city. We want them on our boards, even if there are occasional conflicts, because of their experience and their knowledge and their expertise in the field. So that also is, I think we signed, did we sign that yet?
That's been accepted.
It has been accepted. So those are both released, either will be or have been just recently.
You really do have a good committee, don't you?
We do. We have a really nice balance on our committee right now. This is something that I passed around. This is, I guess this would fall under, I can't remember if this came to us specifically with a request, or whether we just chose to draft this. I can't remember under what circumstances. This is
came to you through Amy.
well, it did originally, and I think what ended up happening is while one of our meetings, we went back and watched an assembly hearing for about an hour at one of our committee meetings, and we watched a series of disclosures, financial disclosures, and this was and it brought to our attention some things that maybe we could help with, because as far as clarifying what the role of the ethics board is and what the role under the code that we interpret the role of the assembly to be. So the concept that we have is if there is a financial interest, any financial interest must be disclosed. And at the time, I remember with Amy too, we were trying to streamline the process. We were having requests to streamline, and we were having a difficult time streamlining the process within the terms of the code. Because under the code, what our interpretation is that any interest must be disclosed. The body, the assembly, is then voting on whether it's substantial. The ethics committee doesn't get involved in that determination at all until there's an issue like an NOPV, notice of potential violation, for a failure to disclose. Whether it's substantial or not is not something that we get involved with. That's completely within the discretion of the assembly. But it is something that the assembly must consider under the code. And then under the code, we had rewritten it, or we had suggested some changes to the code that have factors to consider whether it's substantial, and so we simply pointed those out. Just by way of background, those factors came from case law that came up in a case here, 2 or 3 years ago. A matter came before us in the committee, and we actually ended up hiring outside counsel Nelson Page from Burbonian Pease and Kurtz, whatever the name of the firm is. He came in and helped us do a lot of legal research, and he came up with a whole series of cases trying to determine what is substantial in the context of substantial financial interest. And these are some of the factors, not inclusive, but some of the factors to consider when determining whether an interest is substantial. And those are in the code now. So we wanted to pass this around just to help, because we were watching this video and thinking, that's not the way we would enjoy seeing it happen. Sometimes, I think a lot of times it tends to get streamlined, but things get lost. And I think that in summary, we're handing this out and under the category of educational purposes to try to help distinguish our role from the assemblies and also help the assembly in the best way we can.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
may I make a comment on this? From my seat next to in the middle of the assembly up there, I can tell you that one of the issues is not financial interests, because I think we all know what money is and what a financial interest is. And I think that it's helpful what you've said, David, that you have to disclose every interest. And we know that financial means if it's $1 or a penny, then you have to disclose that. And Julia can jump in here if I'm wrong, but my concern is that I think the assembly has a much harder time on the personal interest. And so under personal interest, if you look at that, in your third paragraph, so like in the second paragraph, financial benefit or expectation of a benefit. In the third paragraph, it talks about if there's a potential downstream financial or personal benefit. We get what a financial is, but what is the personal benefit? It's a friendship. And is a friendship a downstream benefit? I think that is so hard to nail down. And then even if you go on, so what I just wanted to let you know is if there's any way that you could help. So for example, Dick Trainey's wife is on the Animal Control Advisory Board. His wife is a teacher at the school district. Amy's husband works at the fire department. Patrick Flynn has an interest in a bar. Former Mayor Sullivan had an interest in a bar. But as Julia knows, sometimes it's not just Mr. Flynn's financial interest in the bar, which is very small, or Mr. Trainey's wife's salary. But the other issue, the bigger issue, is for Mr. Flynn. Those are his friends that own that bar. And then his friend bought a new bar. And I think and it's happened to Mr. Starr as well. He made a disclosure, and he is doing some consulting or something for someone that's working on something. It's not a financial interest, but it's a personal interest. And my perception, which could be totally wrong, is that we read, or that when they go through the factors here, they practically read out the word personal. And all we focus on is financial. So if there's any way, I think it would be really helpful for the board to explain what is a personal interest. And there are going to be times where if I was dealing with something like a bar that had nothing to do with my friends, or a bar that had to do with my friends, I would want to be recused from the issue. And I think sometimes assembly members are asking to be recused, and the assembly goes through the criteria and says no conflict. And I think that's problematic. And I don't know if you agree or not, Julia.
Well, some of the background here is that when the ethics code was being developed, the interest of the assembly was to make sure that both because it was iterative, so first the financial, and then what we called the private interest, which is what you're calling personal, and he's talking
yes,
about
I'm
personal
sorry.
and everything, but in the code it's called a private interest.
Code is private.
And so, and to make sure that was disclosed, but the emphasis was on disclosure and not on making a conflict. So when you're saying it's problematic, I agree that it's problematic that it may not be getting fully disclosed. I don't think it's problematic that they're saying that there's not a conflict, because the intent was to make sure that assembly members did participate, except when, in the case of a private interest, their private interest would really shake up the public trust. So a key example of that, it used to say that that originally it said that if their private interest was going to keep them from exercising the public trust, because that's their duty, to exercise the public trust and to put their private interest aside. And so if it was substantial enough, then they'd have to say that they couldn't put the public interest above that. And so then Sheila came on the assembly and she said that her brother was an architect, and there was a contract that he had. He could be awarded the contract, and the assembly was going to be approving it. And her problem was that she thought that she had no problem putting the public trust above her brother's private interest. He didn't live with her; it was separate. But she thought that by participating in awarding a contract to her brother would jeopardize the public trust and the perception of that. And so there's a slight rub there, because when the state and several others, it was like a ripple effect that went through the country. I think they were all at an AG conference, and they realized that the common law conflict of interest and appearance of conflict was still in place pretty much everywhere, but it had developed from colonial days before the decision was made that there were not going to be professional politicians, that wasn't going to be a government job forever. And so that once the country had shifted and the population had gotten so that you weren't expected particularly in local government, to make your living off of the salary that was paid as an elected official, then there were going to be conflicts, and it shifted from having conflicts and non-participation, because then you have just a tiny number of people who aren't conflicted, to doing what David has been talking about here. What we're happy about is managing the conflict. The CFO is managing the conflict. It's there, but it's being managed, and it's being here. Dee, for a long time, and me too, have been concerned every time everybody on the assembly wants to get by the conflict and rush into
I
the thing.
agree.
And that's where I'm totally, because what's really important is to have the disclosure on the record, even if it's a repeated thing, because then in allowing the participation, you have the foundation that says, okay, we see that. And like in that bar situation, it might not be your friend. And this was on the record, so I'm not, sharing anything that wasn't right on the floor of the assembly, but there will be things that the assembly has to vote on, that no matter which way an assembly member votes, it's not going to be popular. And so an example was, and what they used to say about somebody who was on the assembly way before I came on, was that every time an unpopular topic came up, she was in the restroom, So an example of that was when the smoking ordinance came about. And the then Assembly member, Dan Sullivan, did not want to vote on that, because either he was going to alienate smokers or non-smokers. But from his disclosure, what he said was that he was going to be opening a bar. This was going to affect bars. His bar had decided as a business decision to go non-smoking. And so where he thought he had a conflict was that if the code was passed and everybody went non-smoking, then his conflict was that they lost their economic advantage of being, okay, so he did a disclosure, and it was way too tenuous to allow him to be excused from voting. And so that's, that there will be that tension always. And as long as you have a complete disclosure, then you're good, because the actual state code, even for a substantial financial interest, the state law allows that to be waived by the body. Now, you don't even have to have rule of necessity or anything. And the Assembly chose not to go that route. And so if they find that there is a substantial financial interest, then they excuse. But the ultimate authority on participation is really whether is a balance there that's not exactly drafted in black and white and code, but the balance is it better to have everybody participate and have a holistic, thing, or not? And so I think that these criteria were initially drafted before private interest was even in there. And then when private interest got added later, it meant that that they were still focused on the private interest. So the only really thing we have, and I think that that's what you're pointing out, is that we have this other section that is in E or F of the code that says about the public trust. That if the assembly, now it's if the assembly finds, if the person making the disclosure thinks that the public trust would be jeopardized because of their private interest, they don't have to say that they wouldn't put the public interest above their own, but if they can put that question to the body. And that's really the only thing, and there's no real criteria, and I think that's what you're saying, they don't have a list to read down about that, because these all don't quite fit in. What I'm not sure about something that you said, David, is that I remember when you had outside counsel come in, and it was about, I thought at that time, because you invited me to come and talk to the board, it was not about the financial disclosure, it was about use of
I remember what it was about.
Yeah.
It was the issue where they used advertising.
Yeah, it was the advertising issue, because these criteria have been in the code since the beginning of the code.
Oh, okay.
You know,
All right.
yeah, I just,
Yeah.
so that I don't, and they were based on, not only were they based on case law, but they were also based on the kind of dilemmas that had come up in disclosures. You know, Anna Fairclough made a disclosure one time, and what she said was that she wasn't comfortable voting on a conditional use permit for a martini bar that was, had applied for downtown on 7th Avenue. And the reason why she didn't apply was she got a call from her mother, who was a contingent beneficiary of property from one of her friends that was in that neighborhood. And her mother had said, they can't put a martini bar in there. And so, and so the assembly excused her from participation, but it fit into nothing under the old code. But it did fit in to having a private interest that when your mom tells you not to vote and you don't feel like you can go against your mom, even though you're on the assembly, you need to say that I got this wife or this spouse or this other thing, and for this particular one, they're putting me in a jail. Ernie identified it on behalf of somebody, it might have been Patrick Flynn on a disclosure, and said, "Why? I don't think Patrick's comfortable." Patrick wasn't saying
Yeah.
he couldn't put the public trust, but Ernie said, "Why do that?" The problem for the single member district, though, is that when you excuse somebody because during a process they went out and hired the opposing party as counsel on unrelated matters, so now the whole downtown isn't represented in that. So that's the other rub that is.
Julia, that is exactly my concern, though, is I think it's what both of you are, you know, really all three of you, what happens is someone makes a personal disclosure, and instead of going through the criteria or the last piece that you just said, we just have a statement that I don't see that as a conflict. And then we need someone like Ernie to say, but I don't think that person is comfortable. And so I think we're missing two pieces. We're missing the criteria, and we're missing the, I don't think someone is comfortable. And so that is my concern as well. And I think maybe, you know, we've got the gold sheet, and maybe we just need to have 10 or 20 copies up there so that we go through it every time. I don't know.
I think there's a couple of things we can do. One is we need to get in black and white what the procedure is. I've been very uncomfortable when the chair is sitting there and Amy is handling the disclosure, asking the questions, and then saying, I don't think there's a conflict. I think that's the chair's job. I think the chair should be the one that does that. But I think it needs to go exactly the way that you're talking about, is this disclosure, these are the questions you ask of that. But I also think you can do the disclosure in two ways. I think as a member of the body, I could say I have a possible conflict, or I could state I've got a conflict. And if you state it as a conflict, then the questions would be asked in a manner that the body would listen to it and say, yeah, but it's not great enough for us to give you a free walk. I think it can be just the way you state the question. I just want to let everybody know I have a possible conflict here. Or in Patrick's situation, or if it were me and I were not comfortable, and I would say, I've got a conflict on this one.
Right, but when you have the just in terms of there's nothing that I disagree with what you said. I'll just give you some background. What they did before, when Debbie and everybody under the old code, and then the beginning before you were on the board, it just alternated. It's not that the chair needed to make the ruling, so somebody else had to ask the questions. Sometimes that was
But
the vice chair.
chair does need to make the ruling.
But the chair makes the ruling, unless the chair wants to put it on the board right away. And so that's at the chair's option to do that. And that's been in code, and that was in code before, but a lot of people didn't understand it. So it's usually not the chair making the questions, but people can do, and what I thought Amy was doing, and it's, at the last meeting, Bill Falsey asked if I had a copy of her script, and I didn't make that script up for her, but he was impressed enough that she goes through, she does it better than anybody does it. So we've asked her to actually write down what it is that she's doing, because she went through the code herself and just goes through, because she had to do it so many times. But I always thought that what she was doing was doing the questions, and as was done before, people on the assembly got to comment. And so I thought that she was doing the questions and then she was giving her opinion, but that wasn't necessarily the chair's opinion. Everybody should be giving their opinion. And there's a couple of things that we've talked about recently, and we're going to talk to Dick and advice to the chair is that when it is in that area that Barbara's talking about, the non-financial interest is just as a policy on the assembly to put it on the board.
Oh, that is a
Because
great
that's
idea.
what Amy and I talked
Great
about
idea.
last time after Bill asked me that, because that way it's just out there, because that really is in the assembly's discretion about that. But when somebody says that I have a conflict, just as in what Sheila directed before, that means that they haven't put the public duty of an assembly member above their private interest. You know, that means that, like in the case of Patrick, that means that during a proceeding after the assembly was all instructed to avoid conflict, and as Cheryl had talked about when she did the training on the Eberhardt and other matters, Cheryl Brooking, that you have, when you go into quasi-judicial mode, you have a duty to avoid conflict. That's why you don't have those different things. So that means that even all that was in place, you put your own private interest and went out and got that person to be the attorney, because you valued their opinion, and that's going to knock you out. And it probably should knock you out. But it means that there's a downside to doing that also for that person.
I like both of your ideas, and I hope that it helps the board that obviously we've thought about this a lot and we recognize what the problem is. But I think your idea of a procedure is really good. And I think that Julia and I could write something up, that starts with, I have a disclosure.
Right.
And then we could say it's a financial disclosure, it's a personal private interest. And then I would like to suggest that the procedure should be that the vice chair always reads the questions. Although I think you're correct that any member could, but I think as a procedure that could be helpful. And then I'd also suggest that the person reading the questions not express their opinion, and then the chair makes the ruling. And then, or the chair
Or the
allows
chair,
discussion.
everybody, that they
yes.
say that. They
Right.
don't speed it up
Yeah.
and have it look like, because I never thought of what Ernie had said, but sure enough, I mean, if it's always delegated to Amy, and she's always saying, okay, well, on the basis of this, Mr. Chair, I don't see it, then it's like Amy's the power behind the throne, and I didn't even think
The
of
reality is, every time we get in trouble about anything, I don't care what, whether this or an election or whatever, we go along and we get sloppy. And that's what we've become in disclosures. We've become sloppy in how we're handling it. We need to get it back on track and have a procedure. But we follow into it the same way every time.
Right, because the other thing that Ernie did as chair is that he encouraged the people, instead of what Dick did, which was try and get a ruling from the board on Amy that everything was going to be okay forever and ever, and there wasn't really allowed that. But what Ernie did as chair is have, and I'll have to see if we got some of those, just build into the into the disclosure information that addresses
What- yeah.
the criteria, too, so that the disclosure answers the question. And so then you don't, I mean, that was an efficiency thing. So then you don't have to go back and ask all those things. So the disclosure can have all this. Then then the chair can either make the ruling that's based on your disclosure under those factors, I don't see a conflict, or they put it on the board, or they have that.
I would 100% agree with you if everybody did their homework ahead of time. The problem is if somebody doesn't include that in their disclosure, then we could allow a future chair to say, if they just had a script that said, okay, I make a ruling that it's, and I think that
Right, we
might
have
have
to
been
have
how
that
we got
fallback.
lazy.
We have to have a fallback, but I think in that procedure thing that you said, where we could draft a
Yep.
procedure up that says I have a disclosure, then we can,
If you do this, then,
I'll tell you what we're gonna do. You get together, get this drafted, documented, we'll bring it to our next meeting, we'll take a deal, and we'll send it to the body, and we'll fix this. So we're not sloppy.
I think you're right. It's almost like if you go back and review the record in some court case, it's almost easy to forget that the assembly is there doing this every time.
Right.
But that's not how.
the
That's not how
snapshot looks.
The
Yeah.
snapshot is something comes up from the public, and they have a problem, and they pull that record.
Yes.
They don't pull all of them, and if that one is not followed,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter that you've done it 10 times in the last 10 meetings,
Mhm.
and it's the same every time, and everybody knows, no, because that little snapshot's going to be the one that gets blown up
Yep.
and analyzed.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
That's great preventive
and
law.
this is a really great way to preempt something.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good. Anyway, so if there's anything that we can do to help,
David, you guys
We are
are
here.
outstanding. Thank you.
absolutely.
Conflict management,
That's
yes,
right.
yes.
Yes, yes.
Well, it is. It's management.
Management.
We're a small town. I mean,
Thank
there's
you.
the same thing with court cases in front of judges.
And please share with your committee how highly we think of them.
I will. Thank you. I will. Very much. All right. Maybe excused.
You may.
All right.
All right.
our next item, should we have a conversation here?
Sure.
Okay, so this is a little ordinance that came about because we had a couple of little technical issues. Oh,
My copy. Yeah, I had it.
so, I will tell you that section 1 is a correction, and section 3 and 4 are corrections, and section 2 is a clarification.
Okay.
So let's talk about the correction in section 1. The issue was that when we did the code revision, we eliminated the word tabulating ballot and two-part ballot, and we missed a section. We just are correcting it. We don't use tabulating ballots.
We wanted to remove the archaic
Yep.
language throughout the code.
So we just missed that one. So then, I'd like to skip to section 3, which is on page 3 of 4. So here, we're talking about the sample ballots. So we have two types of ballots. We have an official ballot and a sample ballot. Again, this was something that we had missed in our code rewrite, that the sample ballot is to contain the full text of the proposition passed by the assembly. And as you know from some of the bond props, that is not practical. You know, we're going to have a sample ballot that's over 100 pages. And in an effort to make the sample ballot and the official ballot be identical, one is on a different colored paper, it's marked sample, the other one is the official ballot marked official. So we wanted to make sure that those are the same. We needed to make this change so that the text of the props is not on the sample ballot, but we've added a provision in section 4 on the next page and here that it'll be available. So we're gonna make a notebook, a 3-ring binder, and we're gonna put all of the bond props and all of the initiative and referenda or anything else like that, any charter changes, and we'll just have them in a notebook. So if someone wants to see what's on it, they've got the notebook.
And I would suggest having 2 at each, just in case you got a couple of people that want to read it at the same time.
Good idea.
So there's some.
Especially at our busy precincts, that's a really good idea. So
So
that's
I
those
had
ones.
a question just to educate me. I had thought before I was reading this, I thought that the actual thing that was called the ballot proposition was the question that you voted yes or no on. And that the ballot, and that all the other stuff, the backup to the yes or no question was called something else, was called like the background to the proposition or the, or something else besides the text of the actual proposition.
Well,
So are those defined words someplace that I just didn't?
so if I had one in front of me, I could show it to you. But you know where on the bond props it has the indented language. We just take that and put that on the ballot. And if you believe that that is the full text of a ballot prop, you're correct. That is what we do.
But then what is it that it's going to be 100 pages? That's not going to be on the ballot. It's going to be something else.
Well, for example, the issue that we were probably concerned about so the old language in the code was the full text of propositions. So the proposition is, you could arguably still say it's the same text. So this came up when we were meeting with the municipal attorney on, I don't even know what issue, probably initiative or referenda, and they were concerned and believed that it meant the ordinance. And you may be correct that it's the indented language,
Right, so
but there was a perception at the time that this meant the ordinance.
And we also thought that we should make that available to voters.
I think you should make it available. I understand the background and everything. My trouble was in looking at this was that that I think that the language was archaic to begin with and didn't fit. And so, and I understand the change, but to me, if what they're reading is the real ordinance, so then it would be, if you wish to review the full text of the ordinance, announcing the proposition, or whatever that is, because otherwise you're telling people that what they're going and voting on isn't the real proposition, and that the proposition is over here someplace else in a bait and switch. And I think that that's going to be a problem for you.
I think you are correct, that this D1D should read, if you wish to review the full text of the ordinance.
Or whatever that is. I mean, whatever you want to disclose to the people, which I'm not sure what that is. That used to go on the sample ballot, but I don't think you want to give people the impression that that they're voting on something less than a proposition, and to read the real proposition that they're voting on, they have to go and ask for it, because that's going to be a
So
problem.
here's what I'm going to suggest it needs to say. If you wish to review the full text of the ordinance authorizing a ballot proposition, please ask an election official. The full text will be provided to
Yes,
you.
and see, you know something that I don't know. That's the only reason why I'm questioning it. Is it the ordinance that you're talking about? all the time? Is it the ordinance that was on the sample ballot?
Well, no ordinance or if it were to be a petition.
The ordinance or the actual petition itself? Okay, so you want to put that in there,
right.
see, that's all I'm saying, yeah. Is it-
And we have it on the last page. And maybe this is better on page 4 where it says the full text of any measure passed by the assembly or that may be enacted by initiative or repealed by referendum. So that was the idea, that we would have the full text of those initiatives that are going to make it on the ballot too.
Right, but that's
Doesn't
still
say
where
that
you have
here.
to do that. You're saying that it's something else there, so I think
An
you just. so it could
ordinance
be
or initiative or referendum authorizing a ballot proposition.
Yeah, or the full text of the instrument authorizing the ballot proposition.
The problem with that is an instrument, unfortunately, but we'll
Well,
work
you can
on
think
that.
about that. You can just think about if.
I'd like it
you
to
have
follow this.
Yeah.
The full text of any measure is what it says
Okay,
here.
measure. Okay.
Measure. It says measure passed by the assembly, I guess it
Or
would
that,
say.
but you could shorten it to say, for that front part, you may want to consider shortening it from the full text of any measure authorizing the proposition.
Okay,
I mean, because what this says, the full text of each proposition shall include the full text of any measure passed by the assembly.
yeah, and it's the full text of any measure authorizing a ballot proposition. Okay, all right,
Just a suggestion.
yeah.
So how do we want to fix that? Do an amendment or just one?
I think we should do an S and put it on the
Addendum.
addendum.
Mm-hmm.
So let's look at the back page, which is also making this,
And we skipped number 2 just in case.
yes, we did, we'll come back to number 2. So now, we're to deliver the ballots, the full text of each measure, it's not each proposition.
Right.
It's the full text of each measure. Each measure.
The full text of any measure, you can just put the full text of any measure. Well, full text of the proposition. But
The-
Mr. Cook shall
Well,
deliver
no,
ballots
it's the
for
full,
text.
it's the full text of each measure or any measure authorizing each proposition. Full text of the measure, of any measure authorizing each proposition to be voted on. The full text. Okay, we just have to work on that. That's just, because you can't say the full text of each measure shall include the full text of each measure.
No, that's right.
Well, I think there, we might be able to say the full text shall include, and it may need to say the complete, or the complete ordinance.
Yeah.
And then I think we have to say ordinance passed by the assembly or, and that might be a place where we could say measure or document, measure, document, or measure.
And then why does it have to be that may be enacted by initiative or each
It should probably say to be. Would that be better? To be enacted by initiative or repealed by referendum?
Or proposed. Proposed to be.
To be proposed to be. Ugh.
Not to be proposed to be, just proposed to be.
Okay. Or proposed to be. Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, so we need to work on that a little
Right.
bit. Let me draft that and then
So I
we'll-
had, just so I had in the full text of each measure authorizing the proposition to be voted on. Or A, this could be A. Text of each measure authorizing a proposition to be voted on can be up there. And then this is where you want to spell out.
Okay, can I have this?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. All right, so I think you're right about that, and we can clarify that. Then, going back to section 2, I would argue that section 2 is a clarification. The charter has it has several things regarding initiative and referenda, and then the code was a little bit different. So the code says that the assembly has to pass something not later than 63 days. But the charter says that the assembly, and you can see the charter section is reproduced, it says that the assembly can pass a measure. And it doesn't have a 63 days. So the argument is the assembly could pass a measure in 50 days. And we understand that that makes sense. So for example, let's say that the TNC initiative sponsors got that initiative in, and let's say their deadline is February 3rd. Well, February 3rd is after the 63rd date, and on February 9th, if the assembly had done everything correctly, it could pass a measure substantially same as the initiative petition on February 9th. And that means that it wouldn't be on the ballot. And so we need to make sure that the assembly's right to do so is in the code. I think my position is that typically election officials and the municipal attorney, we read these provisions together and we understand that. But if there was a circumstance where you read the code by itself, you might not understand that the assembly has this other power. So we're just thinking this clarification is prudent.
Right, so my comment here to myself was that, like in your scenario, you had 63s and then the 50, and then the assembly could do it. But what happens if to me, under the charter, it could already be printed on the ballot. It could already, your deadline for
Exactly.
printing is already there.
Yep.
And the assembly goes and repeals something that's on the referendum, or substantially changes something that was an initiative so it matches up. Then the thing is, people are going to go in and vote, and you want the vote to be void.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so my question was, why not? Instead of saying, except that the assembly may pass a measure substantially similar, you don't have that. What happens? And what happens is that then the action's void that they took, that the voters took on that.
No, that isn't the case.
Okay.
Then I would argue that the initiative is vote, because nobody's voted on it yet. Okay, let's do it in steps. So step 1, they got the initiative in. Step 2, the assembly passes a substantially similar measure. And it's after the date that the ballots have been printed. So we actually found this one in the records. And what it is, on every single ballot, there's a cover sheet that says, don't vote on ballot prop number blah, 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 because it's not going to be counted. And then when Amanda runs the results, ballot prop blah, blah, blah is not counted. So it's not void.
Well, I guess my thing is that something is void. And so it doesn't have to be the vote, but you're missing here.
Oh, I see.
The critical words
That,
in the.
it says in the
Charter that it's
charter
void. And so all you say is they can do it, okay, and? They can do it, and then what happens? And so just having the editor's note here,
is
to say
not,
go, it would be better if it was actually just said the same thing as the charter.
gosh, I hate that sentence. It's so dang long already.
But you,
And then we have to
except that the
say,
Assembly may pass a measure substantially similar to a measure proposed to be enacted by initiative, and may repeal or suspend a measure, except that, and then you just accept that.
and then I think,
If the
and
Assembly-
and if so,
But why not just say, except that, if the Assembly enacts
Okay.
substantially the same measure,
oh,
And
okay,
we
got
just-
it.
just
Add an
read-
if.
and then reword the charter language to fit back up there.
Could we say,
You could say, except that an initiative petition or a referendum petition shall be void if the Assembly enacts substantially the same measure prior to the election.
right, but so the focus here, we agree with that, but this focus is on timing. And so we have to focus on, and so the idea of timing is that the Assembly has to pass things by 63 days, which the last meeting this year is January 29th. Except that, even though January 29th is coming up, except that they can pass an initiative or
Okay,
referendum
then
after
my-
that.
Then I wouldn't put it there. I would just make this A.
I agree. That's
And then
exactly
B.
what I was going to say.
Yep. So you're not in agreement along one of those.
Yep.
I really feel good about what we're accomplishing.
Well, this is why I told you I'd come for your support, but I think she and I would have gotten together at some point. Anyway,
Okay, and then we're just copying the charter language. So it's going to read number B, and it might say, except that. It might, I think it has to say notwithstanding. I kind of like that language. Notwithstanding paragraph A.
no, it's that paragraph notwithstanding. Paragraph A notwithstanding. It doesn't
Okay.
withstand.
Paragraph A notwithstanding.
Yeah.
If the Assembly passes a measure substantially similar to a measure proposed to be enacted by initiative, the initiative petition is void, period. If the Assembly repeals or suspends a measure proposed to be referred to voters, the referendum petition is void. I think,
Instead of going
It's
notwithstanding
missing-
this, you
yeah.
could say in B, you could say pursuant to Charter Section 302D, and then just say an initiative
Oh,
petition is void,
got
and
it.
just repeat what is in
In
the
the
charter.
charter.
Saying it three different ways just creates ambiguity. And some of our code used to repeat the charter until Bill Green came along and in his opinion as municipal attorney thought that was duplicative.
ooh,
And he took it all out
oh.
and made it all charter references. Well, it's just that from the standpoint that you're talking about, from the public, they don't see the charter and the thing. We're doing it all the time, as was Bill Green. You know, he became an expert in the charter and the thing, but sometimes going ahead and printing exactly word for word what a charter says and adopting it in code, even though it's going to apply to you anyway, it lets the public know that it applies to you.
Okay.
Puts it in the instructions.
So now B is going to read as follows. Pursuant to Charter Section 3.02 paren D, close paren, an initiative petition is void if the Assembly enacts substantially the same measure prior to the election. A referendum petition is void if the Assembly repeals the ordinance in question prior to the election.
Right, and because you did it this way, I said charter section, but because you already have editor's note here, it's so much tidier if you just put pursuant or whatever that, for pursuant to, and then you can keep all your ordering. So all you're doing is taking an editor's note
And making it
and,
B.
and making it B. And so then everybody has it right there.
But the editor's note goes away?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that goes.
Okay. Got it. And then the paren
And the
goes
print
away.
and the quotation marks.
Okay.
'Cause you're just.
Okay, got it. All right, good. So we'll work that up and I'll shoot it to us to make sure we all agree.
Okay?
And then when you approve it, we'll get it on the addendum.
Yeah, get it.
Okay?
Does it all make sense to you, Olivia? What we're talking about?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. Are you the clerk Tuesday?
Yes.
Okay. I think it would really be good if, in doing this, if we have questions, who do those questions go to? Julia, you, how do we handle that? This is one of those things it would be very handy if after this is introduced and testimony is taken, I have the ability as chair to turn and say, I'm going to let Barbara walk you through there, so I'm going to let Julia walk you through
Right,
this.
plus we have an obligation for the S version to do an AM,
Yeah.
explain the changes. So we'll have some bullets for that.
Right.
Do you have plans Tuesday night? Do you want to come and be the spokesperson? She's been involved. We
That's
we
fine.
worked on this together the whole
Something
time.
like that, yeah.
I-
Now, do we need to shoot it by the Department of Law since
Yes.
they're down here as being kind of prepared to see?
Yeah, we have to.
Yeah,
So,
that's good. That'll be our plan.
Okay.
And, when you get it rewritten, if I don't see it, let's get it, the S version under my name, and we'll get it. We'll be able to get that on the addendum.
yeah, noon
Okay.
on Friday, no
Good.
problem.
We'll put the S version on the addendum. Amanda will be the person that I will call to the podium to just walk us through this.
And so I will just let you know, Amanda and I didn't necessarily agree with this one, but the municipal attorney insisted. And that's why this one is in here. And so this is a compromise position on this one. I still think that it works the way we've come up with it. I just want to let you know he may have more to say about this. Okay.
That's fine. I'm fine with that.
Okay,
Okay, good work.
thank you.
Vote by mail update, I think we're all up to speed on that one. I'm excited.
You know what, I bet Julia isn't up to date. Should we let her know?
Sure.
Could just do a 2-minute update, maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
please, on
Um,
the record, yeah.
I'll start and then let
Mhm.
Barbara go from there. So, of course, everyone knows the resolution passed 11-0. We're really excited to have the full support of the Assembly as we begin the exploration of vote by mail. And we've been able to take that direction from the Assembly and really roll it out into some continued education and outreach. And that is what the clerk's office is focusing on, making sure that we are communicating this substantial change to the public, to the voters, and most importantly, making sure that everyone's aware that we're talking about Anchorage municipal elections and not the state elections. There's the potential for some voter confusion if we transition and the state does not. So we have rebranded and we're now Anchorage Votes for the municipal elections, and we have a logo. It's bright and yellow, so it's very distinct from the state. Typically uses the flag for their logos and stuff, so we are using that on all documents that we're talking about. We've put together a trifold that is very informative about vote by mail across the country, and we have been meeting with different community groups and having the conversation. We are getting very positive feedback from most folks that we talk to about. It's interesting, a lot of times there's a slight hesitation at the beginning of the conversation, but the more that the public is familiar with vote by mail, and specifically the safeguards that are in place that really prevent fraud and make it convenient and easy and accessible to all voters, folks really come around and are excited about the change. I think vote by mail, as it's spreading across the country, folks know somebody outside of Alaska who's voting by mail. People have brother, sister, friend that's in Washington, Colorado, or Oregon, so there's a lot of familiarity. And then
The marijuana states.
yeah. One thing we've been doing is, I think the clerk's office recognized that this is a project that's bigger. It's bigger than us, and so we have been exploring hiring a project manager, and I will let Barbara talk about that in a little bit more detail.
Thank you, Amanda. And one of the other things, the project manager is really exciting. Ernie knows where we're going with this, but Julia doesn't. I think she'll be very excited to hear this. But I also wanted to tell you one of the things that Amanda has initiated is that we have a meeting, 8 o'clock Monday morning, vote by mail. And so we had our first meeting on Wednesday since we weren't here on Monday, but it's a great meeting. It's called 7-7 and Big Rocks. What did you do in the last 7 days? What are you doing in the next 7 days? What are your big rocks? So it's Amanda, me, and Jackie. And you can just imagine that that's very productive, and I just want to make sure you know that, Ernie, that we're taking this very seriously.
Is the resolution something that you posted on the election webpage?
No, and we've also created a vote by mail page, so
That's-
that is a
yeah.
great idea. I'll get it in
Well,
both of those places.
She's created a couple of things. So she has a vote by mail page, so that's a great place for it. The other thing Amanda created was a calendar. So Julia knows, I have like 5 calendars. I've got the assembly calendar, the clerk's calendar, this room calendar, and Amanda created a vote by mail calendar. So on the vote by mail calendar, we had the weekly meeting that we had today, and then all of Amanda's speaking engagements. And I'm sure we're going to have lots of other things, but it's just another way to keep the project, recognize the importance of this project, and that it's not something that's just going to fit in with our other work. It's really a separate entity.
It's a project.
Yeah, it is one big project.
Did you tell her about the project manager?
No. So the finalist for the project manager is RDI Consulting, Dennis Wheeler.
Wow, won't that be exciting?
Yeah. While I got this stuff on my mind now because I don't have a pen. The resolution, we had one originally that wasn't date specific. And the reason that I came back and said, no, you've got to make this date specific, was I knew pressure had to be brought because it had to have a project manager, it had to have funding. And if I got this where we had 1 year to get it done, the mayor had already indicated he was 100% on board with this. I'd already talked to him about there's going to be money involved, and he says, understood, we need to spend what we need to spend. So it was just crucial to me that we get that, where we had a date certain, and then we would get what we needed to do, because we could not end up with this being other duties as assigned, because it's just like I argued with marijuana last meeting about everybody, well, we can go a year and just no, we can't. This is a whole new demand on all the departments, and you can't just absorb this. It's got to be new money and new people. So I felt really good about that one. The other thing that I want to make sure we do is get our language correct in ordinance for mail-in. We've got some housekeeping that we need to do. The one thing that I'm sure about, and anything can change, I mean, I understand that. But I knew when we, as a body, voted that we were going to move the election to November, I knew that was never going to
He said that,
happen.
you said that.
Well, I
That was
knew
great.
it was never going to happen, but, so I was at the point because I had no doubt in my mind we were going to do vote by mail. I also really had no doubt that when people finally, their brains click the right way, you don't want to get into that mix. We're going to increase it. So my desire is to get the municipal code correct before I leave. Pretty well got everything else in place before I go. So there's certain things I want to get done by, and it's got to be by that first meeting in April, not the second one, because that's just certify the election and move on. So let's see what we need to change by code to get ordinance.
I've started that already. And so, I'm going to tell you something about the Equal Rights Commission Code, and some of you are probably familiar with 5.20 of the Equal Rights Commission Code is employment, and I think 5.30 might be housing. Well, we were looking at getting a contract, and then it goes on like that. We were looking at getting a contract with HUD to do fair housing enforcement. So there's a code section called 5.25 that's called the Fair Housing Act. And it's never used. This one is used, but this one is not. It was just enacted to get that contract. And so I'm going to suggest something similar here that, and there's a couple of reasons for it. If we make a code change to all of this good code that Amanda and Dennis and I drafted, and something goes wrong between now and April of 17, we have no old code to run an election by. So I'm going to suggest like a new chapter, like I know they do in Title 21. They've got like 2110-1000 or something like that, or something bizarre like that. So I'm going to suggest a very different citation method so that maybe we preserve existing Title 28, but then set up this new section that's the by mail section. And then we'll do what that old section that Julia did, that the assembly authorizes a by mail election by resolution, and then we'll get that done. Wild idea, we can keep working on that and come back to everyone. The one other issue is we can always come back to the old code. Maybe we just in for a penny, in for a pound, just change it all. And if it fails or if something goes wrong, then we just change it back and we preserve whatever it was. But that's just a wild idea.
Well, I would prefer, if we've got time to do it, let's do it and get it done right, because technically we're at the point, we're already doing this. I mean, the big hurdle was the resolution passed in 2017, we're going to vote by mail. Now we got to go back and do whatever cleanup we need to
Right.
do in the code. So we will get that worked out. The one thing, to my knowledge, we haven't addressed, and I should probably talk to Dick about this one, is the mayor's excited, everybody's excited about this. Let's address the space issue. If we don't do that, we get everything else, and all of a sudden we're here, boom. Reality is, and I know there's people that their heart will just start fluttering in regards to this, but it seems to me the space that we need is on the first floor of this building.
Well, Ernie, I think one of the advantages of having Dennis Wheeler as our number one project manager, in a conversation that we had with Dennis recently, he said space is one of our top 7 issues
Right.
that we have on the board here. He said, "Do you know what's going on with the Porcupine Building?" And I said, "No." And he said, the Mayor Sullivan couldn't figure out what to do with that, so I think it's still in the inventory. So Amanda and I looked it up. It's over off Mountain View. It's off
Right.
Commercial Drive.
Yeah.
It's a 1-story building, and I have an email ready to go today to Tammy Oswald at Real Estate. I'll send it to Tammy and Robin. I know Tammy's just working part-time.
Yeah.
And so, and Dennis, we talked about it, if he's awarded the contract as a project manager, he'll probably take that over and make sure that the leasehold improvements are done. That'll be part of the project manager's job. But one of the things that Amanda and I like about that space is it's still close to downtown. It'd help Mountain View. It's on a single floor. It's open. The leasehold improvements would be less probably than trying to renovate the first floor.
Plus, we own that building, so when you do
Yeah.
renovate the first floor, if that's what you do, I mean, here, we
Oh.
pay for it, and the landlord then
Owns it.
ups our rent for
Right.
having it.
Yeah, my only, and I'm fine, we're going
Okay.
to work this out. The thing I want you to think about is when an election goes bad, and you're the clerk, and you're in your office here, and you've got moment by moment disasters that you're dealing with, that little trip from here to Porcupine can be the end of the world, because I saw times where it's like, you had to get the municipal attorney and you and everybody in an office that quick, because that's the only downside I see to it.
Okay.
So I will say that throughout the entire conversation, I have not wanted to move elections outside of City Hall. I have been a strong no voice against moving elections outside of City Hall. And it was not until I traveled to Washington and I saw 3 different jurisdictions and how they were using space before I realized we do not have the space in City Hall to make our elections successful. And because we are cramped for space, we run into problems. And so I do see that it is a challenge to be outside of City Hall, and especially if we need to have a quick meeting with a municipal attorney or anyone. But I think that having a large dedicated space where we are able to process things from point A to point B without things moving in every different direction will lead to the potential for successful elections where we won't need to have these. And I'm thankful for technology that we could set up quick meetings, and maybe we could look into having some video connection with here at City Hall, so that if we need a quick meeting,
Well,
that
I think you need that. It may also be the fact that for that, 2 weeks, if you have a good election, when you're designing that space over there, you're going to need an office for the clerk, you're going to need an office for,
I think
that was the
Yeah.
thing that people didn't understand when the election went bad, and I was getting beat over my head because I let the deputy go and I kept this one and these just fire them off. That's not an option, The election is going. You've got people that are doing it, and they've got to finish the job.
Yeah.
and they've got to be readily accessible to it. So,
Well, and I think part of the conversation when we talked about this off-site space was that I would be there full-time and I think that the relationship between Barbara and I was that, we're constantly in close communication throughout the election process. So even though I would be in a different location, we would be in communication throughout the day. So Barbara would be.
that would be the only point that I've got, and if you've got a program in place and forever contingency, and please, let's don't have another election of 2012 until 3012, and then we'll all be gone.
Right.
It won't be a deal, but the chaos that went on.
Also, I think because, I mean, Amanda lived through that chaos with you, and I lived through
Right.
the chaos with you,
I
and
did.
and Barbara participated in the cleanup of that chaos afterwards. So that was truly a horror show. I'm thinking that the other thing is, among the other improvements that have recently been enacted, and why I was really happy to see that implemented, is that appointment of a second deputy, so that you don't have all the eggs in one basket. Because having a deputy clerk for administration means that the clerk during election doesn't have to be, if things go awry, doesn't have to be handling all the regular administrative
Right.
things of the assembly and all of that stuff going on when they're being pulled to assist with management of the election. And I'm just intuiting that was one of the
No, I
lessons learned, from 2012 is, it's a time when, just as you can't have the project in going to by mail or marijuana be implemented in work as usual, when it comes to elections, I mean, overwhelming. Everybody said that was the most important thing, the top priority of the clerk's office. Yet if the clerk is seconded to the assembly to take care of the meeting, to take care of all the back story of what happens to every assembly meeting and all that work that's going on, and yet has to do needs to be available to the deputy of elections to be able to say, okay, we're in crisis management, here goes, instead of something else. So I think that's a good thing too there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, the big thing is just having the space where we're not handling stuff the way that we've handled it up to now. But that's the only thing that would be a point of concern in mind, is that the clerk, because at the end of the day, it's one of those things, you and Harry Truman, the buck stops with you.
Yep. And as we go forward, I think one of the other things that I discussed with Ernie and Amanda and Jackie and I discussed, I think we discussed it with Dick too, is that we're going to have an executive steering committee, and the executive steering committee is going to be Dick and Albie and Ernie right now. And their titles are, it's Assembly Member Trainee, it's Assembly Member Ray Jackson, and it's Assembly Member Hall. But then after April, we've asked Ernie to be ex officio on that committee, so that it has continuity. I don't think we can switch and have a new executive steering committee on this project when we will be in pretty deep by then. We need that continuity. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I hope that on these other things here, we get things resolved with the state. But the other thing that's one of your rocks.
It is.
And I think you need to be having a conversation about, okay, when's our drop dead date on this? When do we just say, fine, the state is not going to be a partner, we've got to do this on our own?
Well, did you know, interestingly, our proposed project manager actually asked us that question: do you want me to work on resolving this? And our answer was yes, provided you understand Mr. Hall has some role in that and the mayor has some role in that. And I think if the project manager can coordinate, and then obviously we have some role with the staff. So as long as the project manager is managing all of us, maybe setting up the meetings,
Yeah.
you know, however that works, but I am very optimistic with the project manager. He understands what the issue is, and I understand that he is going to work to resolve it, because the project will not be successful unless this is resolved. And either it's we work with them or we find a different solution,
Yeah.
and he will do one or
Well,
the
I think
other.
we can get that answer fairly quick, because, you know, I will tell you that during this legislative session, elections is the last thing in the world that the legislature or the governor care about. I think it's interesting that they're into this election and the word marijuana hasn't even been spoken.
Wow.
I mean, they've got to bring all the state statutes into compliance.
Hmm.
Hopefully, the lieutenant governor is going to sign the regulations, but the legislature is capable of just setting us back on our ears in regards. We're ready. We're ready to go
On marijuana.
on marijuana, unless the state throws the big rock in our road.
Hmm.
So I'm hoping that they're tied up enough with what they're dealing with, that the lieutenant governor signs the regulations, and then we can move ahead. Because the one thing that I told Dick yesterday, I am very comfortable that I've got 2 ordinances that are moving through that with work from the body and public testimony, however that works out, I'm comfortable that we're ready to go. We're going to be okay with marijuana. But if the state, I have no idea who's going to do the testing. We're not doing it. We're telling the state that's your responsibility. You deal with it. So we'll see.
On this issue, I'd argue that the legislature needs to take no action. We don't need the legislature to take no action. We need a MOU with the Division of Elections.
Right.
And we probably need some type, ideally there'd be some software link. So what I see the role with the legislature being is Anchorage wants to go to vote by mail. Do you support that? Yes. Or Anchorage needs to go by, would you support that? Yes. And then we get a whole bunch of yeses. And when the time is right, we say, all right, your yes means, give us this access.
Access. Yeah, because they've got what we need. We just need to be assured
Right.
access.
And so that's one route, is getting the legislators to help us pressure the Division of Elections. But then the other route is getting the political pressure, that would be with you and the mayor, getting Byron and Josie to
Yeah.
agree. And technically, Josie has already told us, that they would share the signatures with us. The problem is it's much more complicated than I think she might even understand. And so we need the staff
Right.
and Dennis truly understands what the issue is, and I think he can help us come to an agreement with the state or to create our own
We're going to get it
solution.
resolved. I got no doubt about it.
Okay.
But we're just at a space and a time here. I think that should we have to invest the money to do it on our own, we might have access to that money.
Did you know what? That is a very good point, and I did forget about that, and I will make sure that when we hire our project manager knows that.
Right.
So that our project manager includes that in the proposal to the assembly for the
Because
budget.
It's got to be ready for the first quarter
Got it.
budget.
Got it.
Because I know for a fact, a classic example would be on the bond package, there was $300,000 in there to fix the parking lot at the senior center, and the administration has pulled that out of the bond package. It's because we're going to have enough surplus cash just to pay for that. So,
Okay.
and I would tell you, if I were betting on it, this is going to be the last year you see that kind of situation occur. So,
I understand that.
good. What else have we got? Audience participation. Anybody? Anybody? You good, Amanda? Barbara?
Really good, Ernie. Thank you so
Julia?
much.
I'm glad you joined us.
Thank you.
Very
Thank you for-
productive. It'll be good.